The rain came sideways across the gas station lot, and the girl on crutches stood under the awning with her hood pulled low, watching the only man left who might still help her. He had one boot already swung over his bike, the engine ticking warm, the chrome beaded with water. She had maybe 4 seconds before he was gone. She did not know his name. She only knew the look of someone about to ride away, because everyone in her life rode away eventually. "Wait," she said. Her voice cracked on the single word. "Please, just wait." The man froze with his hand on the throttle. Behind him, the highway hissed under the storm, 18-wheelers throwing up walls of spray. He turned his head, and the light from the station sign caught a face that had been broken and rebuilt more than once. He did not look annoyed. He looked, for one strange moment, like a man who had been waiting his whole life for someone to ask him that exact thing. He killed the engine. Her name was Delavos, and she was 19 years old, and 3 hours earlier she had been told to leave the only home she had. The crutches were not permanent. The doctors had said the leg would heal if she stayed off it, if she rested, if she had somewhere warm and still to sit while the pins held the bone together. She had none of those things now. She had a duffel bag, a brace from her hip to her ankle, and a folded letter in her jacket that she had read so many times. The creases had gone soft as cloth. Della had grown up in a group home on the east edge of a town called Harlow Springs, a place built around a shuttered cannery and a single long road that led to better towns and never came back. Mog. She aged out of the system at 18, the way they all did, with a garbage bag of clothes and a handshake from a caseworker who already had her replacement waiting. For a year she had stitched together a life out of double shifts at a laundromat and a rented room above a man named Cyrus Plank's hardware store. Plank owned half the buildings on the main road. He owned the laundromat, too. He owned it, sometimes felt the air she was allowed to breathe. When her leg shattered, she had been carrying a 40-pound sack of dryer lint to the dumpster behind the laundromat on a loading ramp that Plank had been cited twice for failing to repair. The boards gave way. She went down hard, and the bone came through, and she lay in the rain screaming until a delivery driver heard her. The hospital set the leg, the county covered the surgery, and Cyrus Plank, when he visited her bedside with a fruit basket and a lawyer, had explained in a soft and reasonable voice that since the accident happened on her own clumsiness and since she could no longer work her shifts, he would unfortunately need the room back by the end of the week. He had smiled when he said it. That was the part Della could not forget, the smile of a man who had never once in his life been told no. So she had packed her bag and crutched her way 3 miles to the edge of town, to the truck stop where the buses sometimes stopped, and she had stood there as the storm rolled in, and the last bus came and went because she did not have the $11 for a ticket. And then the bikes had pulled in, 6 of them, then more, rumbling under the awning to wait out the worst of the rain, leather and chrome and the kind of men her caseworkers had warned her about her entire life. She had watched them the way you watch weather. And when they began, one by one, to leave something, in her had simply broken loose. She had picked the last one. The big one with the gray in his beard and the patch on his back. She could not read in the dark. Wait, she had said, and he had. His name was Gideon Marsh, and the patch on his back read President, above a stylized iron horse skull, the colors of a club called the Ridgeline Saints. He was 58 years old, built like a man who had spent 40 of those years lifting things heavier than himself, with hands so scarred the knuckles looked carved. He had buried 2 brothers, and a wife and a son. He had a quality of stillness that made other men lower their voices without knowing why, and he was looking at this soaked, shaking girl on her aluminum crutches as if she were the most important thing the night had produced. "I'm listening," he said. His voice was a low gravel that she felt more than heard. Della had not planned past the word wait. She had no speech. So she told him the truth, because it was all she had left. "I miss my bus. I don't have anywhere to go. I'm not asking for money." She lifted her chin against the shame. "I just didn't want to be standing out here alone when whatever's going to happen happens." Gideon studied her for a long moment. The rain drummed the metal awning. Somewhere a trucker leaned on his horn, and a horn answered him. "Where were you trying to get to?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Anywhere. Away." "Away from what?" And so it came out, in pieces. The laundromat and the ramp and the leg and the man with the fruit basket and the soft, reasonable voice. Gideon did not interrupt. He did not make a sound. But by the time she finished, the other men who had not yet left had drifted closer without seeming to, and the lot had gone very quiet. And Della realized too late that she had said a name out loud in front of people who did not forget names. "Cyrus Plank," Gideon repeated. He said it the way a man tests the weight of a stone before he picks it up. "You know him?" "I know the type." He stood, and he was enormous, and the rain ran off the shoulders of his cut like he was made of something it could not soak into. "Here's what's going to happen, Delavos. You're going to come with us tonight because you're hurt and it's cold, and that's not a thing I'm going to argue about. Nobody touches you. Nobody asks you for anything. You eat, you sleep, you put that leg up. In the morning, we talk about the rest. I can't pay you. I didn't ask you to." He swung the leg off the bike and held out one massive scarred hand for her bag. "Can you ride?" "With the brace?" "I don't know." "Then you'll ride in the truck." He lifted two fingers and a man peeled off from the group, a younger one, lean and watchful. "Sergeant," Gideon said, and the younger man nodded, as if a paragraph had passed between them. That was how Della Voss came to the clubhouse of the Ridgeline Saints, riding shotgun in a dented pickup, driven by a man who said exactly 9 words to her the entire way and watched the mirrors the entire time. The sergeant-at-arms was named Booker Reyes, and he was 36, and he had a single scar that ran from his temple into his hairline, and eyes that catalogued everything. He did not trust her. He made no effort to hide that. He did not trust her. People did not simply appear and ask the president to wait, in Booker's experience, unless they were running from something or toward something, and either way it tended to land on his desk to clean up. The truck smelled like cold coffee and gun oil, and the cardboard of an air freshener that had given up years ago. Della pressed herself against the door and kept her hands folded over the brace, and she watched the wipers drag across the glass, and she counted the seconds between the bikes ahead of them the way she had once counted the seconds between footsteps in the group home hallway, learning whose tread meant safe and whose meant trouble. Booker drove, with 2 fingers on the wheel, and his eyes moving constantly, mirror to road to mirror, and twice she saw him glance at the headlights behind them and hold the glance a beat too long before he let it go. "You're checking if anyone followed," she said. It was not a question. "I'm checking a lot of things," he said. That was 4 of his 9 words. He did not elaborate, and she did not push, and the highway unspooled black and shining ahead of them. Once, when the truck hit a seam in the road and the jolt went straight up through the brace into the broken bone, she made a small sound she could not swallow in time, and without a word, Booker eased off the gas and took the next mile slow. He did not look at her when he did it. He did not want thanks for it. She understood dimly that this was a man who would deny the kindness if she named it, so she said nothing and let the gentleness of it sit between them in the dark. When they pulled into the gravel lot behind a low cinder-block building with a buzzing red sign, he came around and opened her door before she could fumble the crutches free. "Steps are bad on the left," he said. "Use the rail." He set the crutches under her arms, adjusted one that had slipped, and steadied her elbow over the worst of the gravel without making it look like he was steadying anything. Then he carried her bag inside without being asked. The clubhouse smelled like every warning she had ever been given: stale beer, cigarette smoke, motor oil, old leather, a pool table with felt-worn pail in the middle, a long, scarred bar, a wall of photographs, men with their arms around each other, some of the photos draped in black ribbon. But the warmth hit her a half-second after the smell did, the simple animal warmth of a room with the heat on and people in it. And Della had not been warm in so long that her eyes stung. A woman with silver-streaked hair and forearms like a dock. Worker took one look at the brace and the gray in Della's face and went into motion. Her name was Pearl, and she ran the kitchen and, it became clear, a great deal else. Within 10 minutes, Della was in a cracked vinyl booth, with her leg up on a milk crate padded with a folded coat, a bowl of chili steaming under her chin, and a mug of coffee, so strong it tasted like the inside of an engine. Pearl did not ask her a single question. She set down the bowl, tucked a roll of paper towels beside it because the booth had no napkins, looked hard at the brace one more time and said only, "You eat all of that. There's more on the stove, and I don't take it as a compliment when people go light." Then she went back to the kitchen and left Della alone with the first hot meal she had not paid for in a year. Nobody crowded her. Nobody questioned her. Men nodded as they passed and let her be Gideon. Let her eat. Then he sat down across from her, and Booker stood at his shoulder with his arms crossed, and an older man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead pulled a chair around backward and straddled it. This one Gideon introduced as Salt, the club's secretary, the keeper of its records, and Della would learn of its memory. "Tell it again," Gideon said. "All of it. Slow. Salt's going to listen." So she told it again. And this time Salt asked questions. What was the date of the accident? Who set the leg? Was there a hospital record? Had anyone from the county come to look at the ramp? Did she still have the citation numbers the ones Plank had been written up for? Did she have the lease for the room? Did she have anything, any scrap of paper that proved any of it? Della pulled the soft creased letter from her jacket. It was the eviction notice, on Plank's own letterhead, dated 4 days after her surgery. Salt read it twice. Then he set it on the table very gently, the way you set down something that is going to be useful. "He put it in writing," Salt said, almost to himself. "They always think the paper protects them. It works the other way far more often than they know." "What does that mean?" Della asked. "It means," Gideon said, "that you're going to sleep tonight, and you're not going to worry about Cyrus Plank. Worrying about him is our job now." She did not understand yet. She would. That night she slept in a back room that had clearly belonged to someone, a narrow bed with a hand-stitched quilt and a shelf of paperback westerns and a framed photo of a young man in a graduation gown. She did not know whose room it was. She was too exhausted to ask. Before she slept, she lay a long while in the dark, listening to the building settle, the tick of the cooling heater, the low rumble of a bike, arriving late and being shut down, boots crossing gravel, a door, a murmur. 4. 19 years. Every unfamiliar room had meant danger. Every strange ceiling a thing to study for exits. She studied this one out of habit and found, to her surprise, that her body had already decided it was safe before her mind caught up. She slept 11 hours, the deepest sleep of her life, and when she woke, the rain had stopped, and there was clean clothing folded outside her door and her size, and the smell of bacon, and the low murmur of men talking about her in the next room in voices they thought she could not hear. She could hear. She heard Booker say he still didn't like it, that they didn't know her, that she could be anybody. She heard Gideon say that a girl who breaks her leg and gets thrown out 4 days later and still walks 3 miles in the rain rather than ask anybody for a dime is not anybody, she's somebody. And the difference is the whole point of everything they were supposed to stand for. She heard a silence after that. She heard Booker say finally, "What do you need me to do?" What Gideon needed was simple to say and hard to do. He needed to know exactly who Cyrus Plank was, what he owned, who he owed, and where the soft places in his armor were. Because Gideon Marsh had learned a long time ago in a life that had taught him through blood that a man like Plank could not be answered with a fist. A fist only made him the victim. A fist brought the sheriff, who golfed with him, and the county board, half of whom rented from him, and the newspaper which he advertised in. You did not punch a man who owned the town. You took the town back from him one quiet piece at a time, and you did it so cleanly that by the time he understood what was happening, it was already done. For that, Gideon needed Wren. Wren Okafor was 24, the youngest patched member of the Ridgeline Saints, and she did not look like anyone's idea of an outlaw. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and a hoodie under her cut, and she could find anything that had ever touched a keyboard. She had come to the club the same way. Della had, more or less, a runaway from a life that had used her up, and Gideon had given her a seat and a purpose, and in return she had given the club a kind of sight it had never had before. And when Salt laid Della's eviction letter and citation numbers in front of her, Wren cracked her knuckles and smiled for the first time all morning. "Give me the day," she said. She took 3. She set up in the corner of the clubhouse that everyone simply called the office, 2 folding tables and 3 monitors and a coffee maker she guarded like a relic, and she did not so much sleep over those 3 days as nap in 15-minute increments, with her glasses still on. Della brought her food and learned not to talk while Wren was reading. Once, on the second night, Della crutched over with a fresh pot of coffee and found Wren staring at a screen full of property records with an expression Della recognized. The flat, hard focus of someone who has stopped being angry on their own behalf. "Your landlord owns the building your laundromat is in," Wren said, not looking up, "and the building the county inspector's office is in, and the building the newspaper rents." She tapped the screen. "You want to know why nobody ever helped you? It's not that they're cruel. It's that he's the floor under all of them. You can't get help from people who are standing on the same thing that's crushing you." "How do you fight that?" Della asked. Wren finally turned around. The monitor light caught her glasses. "You find the one place he forgot he was standing on a girl's broken leg," she said, "and you pull it out from under him." What Wren found, she found in public records and county filings and the long memory of a database that municipalities never think anyone will read. Cyrus Plank owned 41 properties across Harlow Springs and 2 neighboring towns. He owned them through a chain of shell companies with names like Cornerstone Holdings and Founders Trust, designed to make it impossible for any single tenant to understand that the slumlord who would not fix their heat was the same smiling man who owned the bank. He had been cited 11 times in 6 years for safety violations on his commercial properties. The loading ramp that broke Della's leg had been cited twice. The second time, 8 months before her fall, with a county-mandated repair deadline that had come and gone, with no work done and no follow-up, because the inspector who wrote it up had been quietly reassigned after Plank made a phone call. That inspector's name was Marlene Ruiz. She had been moved to a desk job auditing parking meters. Wren found her in 20 minutes. But the thing that made Salt take off his reading glasses and go very still was smaller and worse. Plank had an insurance policy on the commercial properties. After Della's fall, he had filed a claim. In that claim, sworn and signed, he had stated that the ramp had been inspected and certified safe 2 weeks before the accident, and that the injured party had been engaged in unauthorized activity at the time. Both statements were false, and both were federal, because the insurance carrier crossed state lines, and a false statement to defraud an interstate insurer was not a thing the sheriff who golfed with Cyrus Plank had any power to make disappear. He lied to protect himself, Salt said softly, and in lying he handed us the rope. Gideon did not smile. He rarely smiled. But something moved behind his eyes that was colder and more certain than any smile. "Then we don't bring it to the sheriff," he said. "We bring it where the sheriff can't reach." It was not yet that simple. Plank was not a fool. As Wren dug, she began to leave footprints, and a man who owns 41 properties has people whose job it is to watch for footprints. On the fourth day, a black SUV with dealer plates began parking across the road from the clubhouse for hours at a time. Booker photographed it through the front window without ever stepping outside, ran the plate, and found it traced to a security firm Plank kept on retainer. He said nothing to Della about it for a day, and when she finally saw it for herself and asked, he answered with the truth and no softening. "He's paying men to sit and make us nervous," Booker said. "It works on people who've never been watched before. We've been watched our whole lives. Let him spend his money." On the 5th, Della's old caseworker called her cell, the number she had not given anyone at the club, and asked in a too bright voice whether Della was safe, whether she was with people who might be taking advantage of a vulnerable young woman, whether perhaps she should come in for a wellness check. Plank was building his own story. The story was that a confused, injured girl had been lured into an outlaw biker gang that was now using her as a pretext to extort a respected local businessman. It was a good story. It had the shape of something. A sheriff and a county board and a newspaper would all want to believe, because believing it cost them nothing, and believing Della cost them everything. That was the midpoint, the moment the false safety cracked. Della came out of the back room one morning and found the whole club gathered around the bar and the SUV across the road, and Booker showing Gideon something on his phone, and the air in the room had changed. She thought, with a sick lurch, that they were going to give her back, that the trouble she had brought was more than she was worth. She had felt this exact feeling a dozen times in a dozen institutions, the moment, right before they decided she was someone else's problem. "You found out who I really am," she said from the doorway, her voice flat with the certainty of someone bracing to be abandoned. "And you're going to put me out." Every head in the room turned. Gideon set down his coffee. He crossed the room slowly, the crutch tips of his bad knee clicking faintly against the floor, a detail she had never noticed before. He stopped in front of her. He was so much larger than her that she had to tip her head back to meet his eyes. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly, "and listen to me. because I'm only going to say this once." He waited until she sat. "There is a man across that road right now being paid to make you afraid. There is a phone call this morning telling lies about us and about you. And every person in this room has spent their whole life being told they were someone else's problem. We know that story. We were raised on that story." He crouched, slowly, his knees popping, until his scarred face was level with hers. "We are not putting you out. We are putting him out. Do you understand the difference?" Della did not trust her voice, so she nodded. "Then dry your face. There's work to do, and some of it's yours." The work that was hers turned out to be the hardest part, and it was the part no one could do for her. Because the leverage Wren had assembled, the citations and the reassigned inspector and the false insurance claim, all of it pointed at one truth, and that truth had a witness, and the witness was Della. The accident on the ramp was the keystone. Without her account, sworn and specific, and matching the physical evidence the county had photographed before Plank's people could repair the boards, the federal case was a stack of paper. With it, it was a wall. But, to give that account, Della would have to stand up in the open, with her name and her face, against a man who owned the town and was already telling everyone she was a liar and a pawn. She would have to do the thing she had spent 19 years learning never to do. She would have to make herself visible. "You don't have to," Gideon told her. He told her this several times, and he meant it. "There are other ways, slower, but you don't owe anyone your courage." "What happens if I don't?" Salt answered. "Because Salt did not soften things. He pays the insurance fraud back quietly or settles it, and he keeps the 41 buildings, and the next girl who falls through one of his ramps gets the same fruit basket you did." Della looked at her brace. She thought about the loading ramp, the boards. She had reported twice, herself, to a manager who shrugged. She thought about Marlene Ruiz auditing parking meters for telling the truth. She thought about the smile. Then, "I'm not staying quiet," she said. They did not let her do it alone, and they did not do it with fists, and that was the whole genius of it. Wren packaged everything into a single airtight file, the public records, the citation history, the reassignment of the inspector, and, anchoring it all, the sworn false statements in the federal insurance claim laid beside the county's own dated photographs of the broken ramp. Salt knew a name from years back, a federal investigator who had once owed the club a debt of a different kind. A woman who did not golf with Cyrus Plank and had never heard of Harlow Springs and would not care in the slightest who Plank had lunch with. They did not send a threat. They sent a file. And they sent Marlene Ruiz, who had been waiting 8 months for one single person to ask her what really happened, and who walked into that interview with the original unaltered inspection report she had been smart enough to keep a copy of. Della met her once, the week before. Booker drove them both to a diner, 2 towns over neutral ground, and Marlene Ruiz turned out to be a small, tired woman in her 50s who had spent her whole career believing that writing the truth on a form was enough to make the truth matter. She had been wrong about that. And being wrong about it had cost her the only job she had ever wanted, and she set the folded inspection report on the diner table between them with a hand that trembled. "They told me I was being difficult," she said. "They moved me to parking meters and told everyone I'd asked for the transfer. 8 months I've been counting quarters." She looked at Della's brace and at the cane Della was using by then, and her eyes filled. "I'm sorry. I cited it twice. I should have done more than cite it. I should have chained the ramp off myself." "You wrote it down," Della said. "Turns out that's the thing he couldn't erase." Marlene Ruiz pressed her lips together and nodded, and something in her straightened. 8 months of swallowed shame finding, at last the place to set itself down. Booker, watching from the next booth with a coffee he never drank, gave Della the smallest nod when they left. 5 more of his words, spent over 2 whole weeks. She was learning to read the currency. Quote, and then they did the thing that made it impossible for Plank to spin. They made it public, on Della's terms, in daylight, with witnesses. Not a brick through a window, not a beating in a parking lot. The Ridgeline Saints rode into Harlow Springs in formation on a Tuesday morning, 40 bikes deep, chrome blazing under a hard, clean sun. And they did not go to Plank's house, and they did not go to his office. They rode to the county building where the board was holding its monthly public meeting, the one Plank attended in the front row, because half the board rented from him, and he liked them, to see him watching. Della went in first, on her crutches, in a clean, borrowed jacket. Alone, by the door, by her own insistence, with Gideon and Booker and 40 leather-clad saints filling the back of the room behind her like a wall that had decided to stand up. She had 3 minutes at the public microphone. The chairman, who knew exactly what was in the room behind her, did not dare cut her off. She did not shout. She did not cry. She had practiced this in the back room of the clubhouse, with Salt playing the hostile board, until her voice stopped shaking. He had been merciless, on purpose. He had interrupted her, talked over her, called her confused and unstable in Plank's own reasonable register. And the first 3 times she had faltered and lost her place, and felt the old shame climb up her throat. The 4th time she had stopped, set her jaw, and waited him out in silence until he finished, then continued exactly where she had left off, as if he had never spoken. Salt had taken off his reading glasses and said, "There, that's the one. They can't argue with a person who won't be rushed." Pearl had drilled her on her breathing. Wren had printed the eviction notice large enough to be read from the back of a room. They had built her, the same way they built the file, one quiet piece at a time until the trembling girl from the truck stop could stand at a microphone and not shake. She stated the date. She stated the 2 citations and the deadlines that passed. She held up the eviction notice, dated 4 days after her surgery, and she read the address on the letterhead aloud, and she watched Cyrus Plank's smile begin, for the first time in his life, to fail him. "I have one more thing to say," Della finished, "and it's not to the board. It's to the carrier that received a sworn claim about that ramp 2 weeks before I fell on it. The ramp was cited as unsafe. The claim says it was certified safe. Those can't both be true. I was there. I know which one is." The silence that swept through the room was immediate and suffocating. Plank stood up. He was a tall, soft-handed man in a gray suit that cost more than Della made in 3 months, and his polished shoes squeaked on the linoleum as he turned to address the room, to do the thing that had always worked, to be reasonable, to be wounded, to be the respected man besieged by an unstable girl and her dangerous friends. He got as far as, "This poor, confused young woman has clearly been manipulated by these." And then the doors at the back opened, and a woman in a plain federal windbreaker walked in with 2 colleagues and asked in a voice that carried, Cyrus Plank might step into the hall to discuss a sworn statement he had made to Founders Mutual on the 14th of last month. Della watched it happen. She watched the exact moment the institutional armor came off him, layer by layer, in front of the people he had spent 30 years making afraid of him. The board members who rented from him would not meet his eyes. The chairman suddenly had pressing business with his papers. The newspaper photographer who had come to shoot the unstable girl turned his lens on the gray-suited man being walked toward the door. Plank looked around the room for the faces that had always protected him and found every one of them studying the floor. He looked at the very end, at Della. Not with menace, he had nothing left to menace her with. He looked at her the way a man looks at a closed door he had always assumed would open for him. And then he was gone into the hard, clean daylight, and the daylight did not save him, because daylight was the one thing he had never been able to buy. The federal case took 11 months. Della was not the one who carried it after that morning. The investigator carried it, and Marlene Ruiz's preserved report carried it, and the carrier's own fraud unit carried it, because nothing motivates an insurance company like discovering it has been lied to. Plank's chain of shell companies came apart in the discovery process the way a sweater comes apart when you find the right thread. The properties were frozen, then lined, then sold. Tenants who had spent years afraid to ask for heat found their leases transferred to a court-appointed receiver who answered the phone. Cyrus Plank did not go to prison in the end because men like Plank rarely do. But he paid back the fraud, and the penalties on the fraud, and the legal cost of the fraud. And when it was over, he did not own 41 buildings or any town silence. He owned a condo in a city where no one had ever heard of him, which, for a man whose entire self had been built out of other people's fear, was its own kind of ending. Delavos did not go back to the laundromat. There was no laundromat to go back to. It had been one of the 41, and the receiver had reopened it under new management that fixed the ramp the first week. She was offered a settlement from the carrier for the injury, a real one this time, enough that she would never again stand at a truck stop counting out $11 she did not have. She took it. Salt helped her put most of it somewhere it would grow because Salt did not believe in letting good fortune evaporate, but she did not leave. That was the thing nobody who knew the old Della would have predicted, and the thing everybody at the clubhouse understood completely. She had spent her whole life being moved from place to place by people who decided she belonged nowhere. The Ridgeline Saints were the first people who had ever, in effect, told her to stay. The leg healed. The pins came out. The brace came off, and then the crutches, and then even the cane, and one warm evening the following spring, Della stood in the kitchen of the clubhouse with Pearl, learning to make the chili that had been the first warm thing she ate as a free person, and she realized she had not thought about leaving in months. She had a small apartment of her own, now 3 blocks away, with a lock that worked and a window that opened. But she spent most evenings here, because here was where the people were. She had asked Gideon once whose room she had slept in that first night, the narrow bed with the quilt and the westerns and the graduation photo. He had been quiet for a long moment. "My son," he had said. He'd have been about your age if things had gone different. He had not said more, and she had not asked, and that had been the entire conversation, and somehow it had said everything. The warmth of these people was never in their words. It was in a folded coat under a broken leg. A door opened before she could fumble her crutches, a file built in 3 days, a wall of 40 men deciding to stand up behind a girl at a microphone. They did not say they loved you. They organized the world so that you could survive in it, and then they let you decide for yourself whether to stay. On the night the federal case finally closed, the clubhouse threw the kind of party Della had only ever watched from the outside of, through other people's windows, her whole life. There was no speech. The Ridgeline Saints did not do speeches. But late in the evening, when the music had dropped to a low murmur, and most everyone had drifted out to the lot to look at the bikes under the stars, Gideon found her by the bar and set a small, flat object in front of her. It was a patch, not a member's colors. Something simpler, hand-stitched in Pearl's careful hand, an iron horse over a single word in plain block letters. The word was family. "You don't ride," Gideon said. "You don't have to. This isn't that." He tapped the patch with one scarred finger. "It just means you're ours now. It means if you ever stand at the edge of a road in the rain again, you don't wait for a stranger. You call us and we come, all of us. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing it's ever been about." Delavos, who had been told her entire life that she was someone else's problem, held the patch in both hands and did not cry, because by then she understood that her composure was a thing she had earned. She just nodded. The way Booker nodded, the way Gideon nodded, a paragraph passing in a single motion. Then she went out into the lot with the rest of them, walking on her own two legs, no crutches, no cane, the gravel firm under her boots, and the chrome catching the starlight in a long shining row. Somewhere down the highway, a truck downshifted and faded. The night was cold and clean and entirely hers. She stood among the people who had decided she belonged, and for the first time in 19 years she did not feel like she was waiting for anything at all. She had asked a stranger to wait on the worst night of her life because she could not bear to be alone when the bad thing came. What he had done instead was make sure the bad thing never came alone for her again. If this story moved you, if you have ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to protect you and wished someone would simply decide you were worth standing up for, stay with that feeling for a moment and then let someone know they are not standing at the edge of any road alone. Thank you for listening. If stories of loyalty and unexpected family are what brought you here, follow along because there are more of them to tell.